Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that I think of as a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and his kingdom. And a man who has done outsized work on all of those fronts, I'm delighted to say, is our first guest. His name is Kevin Freeman. He's a chartered financial analyst by training, but has become one of our country's leading experts on economic warfare. He is the host on Blaze TV and other platforms of Economic War Room, an extraordinarily important program, which is accompanied by something I think is of singular importance, which are a series of battle plans about what you can do about the topics he covers on the program. Kevin is also the author of two terrific books, Secret Weapon and Game Plan, and a contributor to a great blog, globaleconomicwarfare.com. It's always good to have him with us. Kevin, welcome back to Securing America.
Thank you, Frank. It's always good to be with you.
Thank you. One of your most, I think, thoughtful and challenging programs in a way, because you're talking about some very complex subjects, is I think you call it the battle of the two dystopias. You might define the term dystopia for those of us who aren't as literate as you, but then walk us through what are you talking about in this program, and how does it bear on life as we know it now?
Well, dystopia is a type of a science fiction novel where you would describe what the future is like, and it's horrible and scary, like Terminator or something along those lines. And I'm a big fan of science fiction. I grew up loving Star Trek and Star Wars both, so I sit on both sides of the camp. But there was a bigger debate over dystopia, over what the future would look like, that took place in the 1930s and 40s between two authors, one named Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World, and the other
Yes.
one, who's better known, George Orwell, who wrote Animal Farm and 1984. And they both argued over how are we going to get to this horrible condition where the government controls everything and everyone, and they had two completely different views of how to get there. And said, what Orwell said, we're going to get there this way, and Huxley said the other way. But guess what? Both are happening right now.
There was no doubt in their minds that we were going to ultimately be controlled by this oppressive form of government, a tyranny. But the question is, who was right in the end? Are we now seeing the Orwellian form of tyranny prevailing, or are we seeing the kind of, hedonistic, I guess you'd say, form or the inducement to another kind of dystopian oppression?
Well, let me describe them for you, and then you can pick. As you mentioned, hedonistic. Under Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, which I had to read in high school and hated. But
Mm.
nevertheless, under Huxley's view, is the entire population gets enslaved to the world state. And the world state literally says, have whatever sexual relations you want. It doesn't matter as much as you want. Just don't connect it with love and a family. Just brazen and take the children and as early as possible indoctrinate them in eroticism and get them involved in that. And by the way, we want to separate sex and having babies, so we'll make babies in test tubes, and we're going to give everybody drugs that will solve everything. You'll get a shot for everything. And so the pharmacological industry is in charge of things. And by the way, God is science. And we have a bunch of brilliant scientists who will tell you how to live and think and act and do. And if you start to question it, take some more drugs, have some more sex. And that's the Huxley model. I mean, it looks to me like that's exactly what we're seeing in the Western model. That's George Soros and open society. Open the borders,
Yes.
one world government, do whatever you want to as long as it's not being productive or supporting a family in a traditional sense.
So that's a pretty bleak future. And you're right. There's a lot of evidence that that is afoot in this world. How about the Orwellian style tyranny?
Well, Orwell's famous for two books, and I found those a little easier to read. One of them was 1984, which is Big Brother's watching you all the time. You get out of line, they slap you down or kill you. And in the Big Brother view of things, 1984 things, that's what we're seeing in China and Russia. And they claim that they are moralistic. And in fact, the language for most of the write ups talks about how their view of sex, for example, is very controlling, very moralistic. It sounds like a religious, hyper religious person. And yet they completely control everything. And everything is run as in Animal Farm by an elite group of people. Animal Farm was where the animals took over the farm, and then the pigs got in charge, and they said all animals are equal. All animals are equal. It's just some animals are more equal than others, like the
Right.
Chinese Communist Party, like the oligarchs, like Putin.
Hmm. So that seems pretty familiar as well. And what you're basically suggesting, I guess, in your battle between these two is which is going to become the dominant strain of oppression in our world. Does there leave any room for hope that we will be able to avoid both of these tyrannies?
Yeah, well, the Ukrainian people are caught in the middle. I mean, they're facing there's economic sanctions being tossed in on the Russians. We're closing bank accounts and shunning Russian cats from cat shows and all sorts of virtue signaling, but they're real impacts. And the Ukrainian people are witnessing tanks rolling through. We're spending our time on pronouns in our military and getting the proper pronoun
Yes.
right and trans rights and things like that. Russia's heightening their nuclear forces. Who's going to win in this? Actually, the economic weapons are very powerful, and we've talked about this, and cyber
Mhm.
weapons. So I don't know who's going to win in this, but your bigger question, is there any hope? And that's absolutely the hope is the American people, the small
Mhm.
ships of America rising up and saying, hey, we don't want your dystopia, and we don't want the other guy's dystopia. So we will fight Putin and be firm on that. But at the same time, we're going to fight this ever creeping control of social media and everything else, trying to lull America into complete submission to the government. We're going to stand up for free speech, for liberty, for the Constitution. Those are the things that we must do at home.
We're going to come back in a moment, Kevin Freeman, with more on this Ukraine business and economic warfare being waged with some pretty effective, powerful weapons for sure. But just to stay with this theme, because I think it's so important, really, to talk about where we are culturally and as a society, as well as as a community that has historically been rooted in very different values and virtues and principles and constitutional rights. And not least, as I know you attach great importance to in your work, as do we, a relationship with the Almighty that, makes some of that behavior, whether it's of the depraved sexual kind or of the brutally oppressive human freedoms crushing kind, you know, totally anathema. And so it really comes down to this: do we still have hope for our country that the sorts of things you've described as liberty, security, and values will govern and not one or the other of these predilections?
Well, we have the good news is that the American people, the polling, and frankly, just my interactions with them and yours, the American people still believe in truth, justice, and the American way. They believe in God. They attend
Amen.
church, and they would love to see the Constitution properly followed. We have a court now that may be willing, a Supreme Court that may be willing to follow the Constitution. That's why they have to go for court packing measures and things
Right.
to disrupt the court. And we have people learning. We're training financial advisors to help people weaponize their money so they can fight back and they can say, look,
Yes.
I have a duty to God with my giving, spending, and investing to make certain that it does good things in the world and not terrible things.
Kevin, hold the thought. That is a tremendously important initiative to which I want to return after we've talked a little bit about the economic warfare underway at the moment. And then we'll take stock with you about what we can do to have it come out right for our country, for our values, and for freedom more generally. Be right back with more with Kevin Freeman right after this.